I do want to talk to you, and we'll try to pivot this and keep up the timeline. Your exit from Crockett, and then when we come back from some of the announcements, we'll talk about the transition to WWF, and then your conversation to Arn about him coming. So can you talk to us a little bit about your decision to leave Crockett? What did that look like? And then make your way to WWF.
Well, I did not want to leave Crockett's. That whole place, I loved it. And in fact, it was so good. I was wrestling on TBS TV, and we were going to start an angle with the Road Warriors. And I had a match with Sam Houston on there, and I came off the top and I broke my leg. And it was a brutal break. And I ended up finishing the match. And so I had like probably about a minute left of the match. And my knee blew up like a balloon right away. And I remember coming back into the dressing room, and I told Dusty, I said, Dusty, I broke my leg. I said, you know, I couldn't believe I was talking. And, you know, it was like the thing hurt so bad, but it was, you know, I guess the adrenaline is flowing. I said, you know, I'm going to have to get to a hospital or something. He says, oh, yeah, we'll get you to a hospital. I said, no, but I want to go back home. I said, I need to get back to Charlotte because I didn't want to be stuck in Atlanta at a hospital there and not be, you know, close to home with, you know, the wife at home and everything. So anyways, I got on a plane. I flew home. And by the time I got home, my knee was huge. Well, to make a long story short, Dr. Awida, who's one of the best surgeons around, he got me in, he operated on. I was in the operating room for probably about 8 to 10 hours. He kind of put my leg back together again. And so I was out. Well, that whole time, when you're out, you're not making money. And it was just getting ready. I was just starting to make some good money and put money in the bank and everything. Well, all the guys knew that I wasn't making any money anymore. So what had happened is everybody got together and started taking like $25 out of their paychecks during payday and gave me money. Wow. I mean, that's how great of a territory that was.
Family, man.
So just to show that, you know, you don't want to leave these bunch of guys. These are your brothers and, you know, the Nikolai's sister. And, you know, it was really a hard place to make the decision to leave. But I was always taught in the business when a promoter lies to you, screws you on a payoff or does whatever, you got to stand up to them. And, you know, you can't trust what they're going to do again if they say, well, we'll get you next time or whatever. Well, you lost that money. So what ended up happening, so we're working all these angles with the Rock and Roll Express and all this. And I think the match was Greensboro. We were supposed to work with the Rock and Roll Express. And Arn, do you remember that? Was it them or was it Bobby Jaggers and Dutch Mantell? One of the two teams. And I'll have to go back and look at the videos and everything. But anyways, I was thinking it was a Rock and Roll Express because we worked those hour Broadways everywhere. And Nikita was supposed to work with, I think, Flair. And what had happened is something changed where he wasn't going to work with them. So Dusty came up to me and he says, Barry, I'm going to put Nikita in that match and I want you to work with Sam Houston. And I said, and I remember I said, Dusty, I said, holy shit, we've been working. This is the big show. I'm going to finally make some money in a pay-per-view. I said, I really don't want to do that. And he's, Barry, you got to do it. That's how we got to put it together. And I said, okay, you know, how about the money? You know, I'm going to take a big cut in money and everything. He says, no, you're going to make exactly what you would have made in that match. I promise you. I said, Dusty, okay, you know, I love you. I'll do whatever you ask, right? So the show went really well. I had a great match with Sam Houston. Everything was good. We worked some other towns and everything. We were at TV in Charlotte, and we're all sitting around. We get our paychecks, and I'm sitting by Ivan, and I look at Ivan, and I look at my check, and Ivan's kind of like, you know, and Ivan knows this whole story, but Ivan kind of is like this when he's looking at his check. You don't want me to see it, you know. And I'm looking at mine, I'm going, it's like $3,500 or something like that, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, I worked a whole year, Angles did everything for this one show, and then I end up with $3,500. I believe that's what the payoff was. And I looked at Ivan, and normally I never ask anybody what they're getting paid, but me and Ivan were close. I said, Ivan, I know you don't want to tell me, but what'd you get paid for that? He says, Crush, I don't even want to tell you. And so I knew right away this was going to be bad. And I said, Ivan, you got to tell me. I said, I gotta talk to the office. He says, I don't want to tell you because I know what you're going to do. You're going to end up going to the office and you're going to quit. It's going to be your last day. And I said, Ivan, I hope it doesn't get to that. But I said, I got to get to the bottom of it, because it wasn't the money. It was what they told me. That was the most important thing to me. So Ivan finally showed me, and it was like, shoot, 15 grand or something, 13.5 or something. But now I'm like, I don't know exactly. It was up there. And I said, you got to be freaking kidding me. So Ivan says, Barry, don't do it. And I said, I gotta. So I walked down the hallway and I go to Dusty's office. I said, Dusty, I need to talk to you. And he knew right away what I was doing because the paychecks were out. And I sat down, I closed the door, and I said, Dusty, I got $3,500. I said, these guys made 3 times what I made. And you promised me I was going to make the same. And he says, Barry, I did promise you that, and that's what you're supposed to make. But it wasn't up to me. It was up to Jimmy. So now I'm thinking they're playing the shell game, all the stuff that goes through your head. And he says, I'm serious. He goes, it was Jimmy. He says, that match is where you were at is what the payday was. The match where they were at, that was the payday for them. And I said, but that's not what we talked about before all this. So he says, you're going to have to go talk to Jimmy. So now at this time, I'm fuming. I got freaking smoke coming out of my ears. Knock on the door. Jimmy says, I'm busy. I said, I don't give a shit. I need to talk to you. I go in there. I close the door. I was ready to fight, But, here's this little guy, and here I'm a 300-some pound guy. I don't want to hurt him or, I want to be professional. So I was talking to Jimmy about it, and I said, Jimmy, I wasn't promised this money. And he looked me right in the eye, and he goes, Barry, that match that you were in, that's what that payday for that match is. And I told him, I said, that's not what was agreed upon for me to go from the match I was in to this match. I was guaranteed the same. And he says, I don't care. He says, that's what you're going to get paid. And I said, well, Jimmy, as long as you're taking that attitude, I says, I got to put my notice in. And he says, well, I don't want you to leave. And I said, well, then pay me what I'm supposed to. And he said, we'll make it up later down the road. And the first thing I thought of when Eddie Sharkey trained me, he told me this exact scenario. He says, you're never going to make the money back. And then he's going to screw you again and again and again. That's just how the promoters are. So I said, no, Jimmy, this is my last day. Boom, I'm done. That's why I went back and I talked to all you guys and I said my goodbyes and I was ready to cry. I was like, I'm leaving the greatest territory ever with all my best friends and everything. And I just had to go home. And that was the end of it.
When you heard Barry relay to you and the others what happened with him and Jim Crockett, was this the first time you heard of something like this happening, or what's your reaction to all this?
Well,
he's one of your close friends.
As a talent, you get pissed. You immediately put yourself in that guy's shoes, and Barry was as unselfish. I mean, what's not to love? He's unselfish. He can work. He's 300 pounds, but he works like a 250-pound guy. All positives, all positives, all positives. He's a good friend. He's a good man. There's no negatives. And to hear that he got screwed and the way that he got screwed, that would come to light with me much later in my career. The numbers were different, but it's the same scenario.
It was eye-opening for you, though, to see him go through that.
Yep. And when he went to WWF and they were going to put him with Bill Eadie, when I was a fan and just a teenager, Bill Eadie made a masked guy look as cool as you could possibly look. I mean, what a great look, right, Barry? His gear will look good. I mean, the masked superstar.
He was the guy.
So I knew if they're coming back with him and somebody, they were going to be pushed the right way. And turned out, boy, was he.